there was going to be a series of meetings around it, around my new book, which has just come out with Pluto. And they've understandably been postponed, but I thought it would be a shame to let the day pass without trying to do something around it. So I thought I'd do some readings from the books. This is chapter 6, The Battle of Trafalgar Square, and I'll do a reading of some of the highlights from the chapter, just to give you a kind of flavour of the demonstration. Maybe you were there at the time, or maybe you weren't, and you're kind of interested in some of the background to it. So the kind of story leading up to the Battle of Trafalgar Square is the poll tax had already been implemented in Scotland, and it was due to be implemented in England and Wales. There was already a mass movement against the poll tax in Scotland. People blocking the sheriffs from going in and seizing people's goods, people who were refusing to pay the tax, people beginning to go through the courts, and the left in England and Wales were building up their movement in preparation for the implementation of the tax there. There had been a big push to try and get the Labour Party to call a demonstration on the 1st of April, and initially there was some kind of noises from Labour that they might call something, but in the end, as the demonstration date kind of got closer, they decided to pull the plug on it. So the All Britain Anti-Poll Tax Federation wanted to go ahead. They wanted to call an action. They called it the demo, because it was, that was the main thing they were kind of organising. But in the run-up to the demonstration, there was loads of protests in front of town halls, because the local government were beginning to set the poll tax, and there was big demonstrations up and down the country, particularly worrying for the Conservative Party. There was lots of demonstrations in kind of the Tory voting south of the country in particular, so they were beginning to get a bit nervous around this. And then the demonstration is called for the 30th of March, 1990, and it meets in Kennington Park. So this is some of the background to it. Efforts to get coordinated action, even a demonstration, let alone strike action, from the TUC were proving to be a labour of Sisyphus. But even troubled Sisyphus had an easy job compared to the left's battle inside Labour itself. Dave Nellist, who was a militant affiliated Labour MP, led the charge to win Labour's NEC over to backing a demonstration. There was a close vote of 13 for but 14 against. Some of the softer left, like David Blunkett, had been willing to back a protest, since it might at least give the impression that Labour was taking a more active approach. But Roy Hattersley rallied the right and argued the proposal down. After that point, the Labour leadership was not just unmovable, they were outrightly hostile. Labour having pulled the plug on the 1st of April demo, it was clear the movement had to rely on its own resources. The Fed announced 31st of March as Saturday, and the day before the tax was due to be launched, as the new date. Activists referred to the 31st March protest simply as the demo, an indication of the kind of focal point it had become. Tony Benn and others made the case for a big united protest against the tax, which was proving to be such a lightning rod for discontent against Thatcher in general. Benn had grown increasingly frustrated with Labour's hostility to the campaign, recording in his diary, "The Labour Party is more frightened of the anti-poll tax campaign than of the poll tax itself." The protesters gathered in Kennington Park in North Lambeth. Ahead of marching to a rally in Whitehall, it became clear just how big the protest would be. Kennington Park was the site of the Great Chartist protest of 1848, a day when there had been rumours of an armed march on Parliament, a possible revolution, and the overthrow of a government. That threat had been ended by surrounding the protest with tens of thousands of soldiers and special constables recruited specifically for the job of putting down any potential insurrection. In 1990, there was a sense of history for many gathered in that South London park. Kennington was soon full of people from across England and Wales. Nearly 1,000 coaches travelled to London from over 600 towns and cities. 2 trains were chartered from Cornwall. There were loads of placards, some mass-produced by one of the Trotskyist groups, others homemade, some anarchist flags, a marching band. One participant described the feeling. The atmosphere was wonderful, like a carnival. People were happy, but this was not an empty, superficial happiness. This was a happiness based on strength and power. And it was happiness that grew and developed as people realised the sheer size of the demonstration and thus of the whole movement against the poll tax. As the crowd passed a building site, 2 of the workmen started singing the red flag. Some protesters carried Union Jacks with the centre cut out, in solidarity with the Romanian Revolution, which had as its symbol the Romanian flag with the emblem of the Socialist Republic removed. 2 people carried a massive bedsheet tied between sticks, emblazoned with a simple response to the community charge, "Up your bum." The police report described the march as it approached the river as reasonably good-natured. Crossing the Thames and entering Westminster, the protest swelled to over 200,000 people. As the demonstration made its way past Downing Street, angry shouts inevitably emanated from the crowd, along with a few cans and other rubbish hurled at the Prime Minister's central London residence. The wrought iron gates at the entrance to the street had only just been installed due to fears of an IRA attack, and police stood nervously behind the bars. A large group of people began a sit-down protest, chanting "Maggie, Maggie, Maggie, out, out, out." More police began to gather around the sit-down, looking to clear the area. Some nervous stewards tried to move the sitting protesters along, hoping to get them to Trafalgar Square to complete the march, but they were ignored. One militant steward berated the anarchists. "You can't even change your socks, let alone society." At 2:16 p.m, a police sergeant noted in his log, "1 arrest, bottles and missiles thrown, prisoner removed from the scene, punks concerned." Then an almighty fight broke out in Trafalgar Square. The police started to strike protesters, leading to retaliation. Hundreds of baton-wielding police stormed out of the South African embassy in what appeared to be a prearranged move. They ploughed into the demonstration, sending people running in fear. From the Strand, police mounted on horseback appeared, charging into the crowd. A woman failed to get out of the way in time and was knocked to the ground. The police thought they were in charge, but hadn't bargained on the sheer size of the protest or the anger of the protesters. People fought back, and the weight of their numbers forced the police to retreat. When a police car tried to drive through the crowd, a protester lunged forward and smashed its windows before the driver accelerated to get away. At this point, no one had control, neither the police nor the stewards. There was only the mass of people retaliating against the violence from the police. As the police horses charged into the crowd, protesters started a chant of "Stasi, Stasi," comparing the British police to the hated East German secret police, who were now being hounded by the democratic revolutionary movement on the other side of the Berlin Wall. The feeling that the protests in Britain were symbolically linked to the events in Eastern Europe was palpable among the crowd. The poll tax might have been a British issue, but the sense of there being a simultaneous global movement was strong. An unguarded building site just off Trafalgar Square provided plenty of ammunition in the form of bricks, sticks and pieces of scaffolding for people to arm themselves with. The South African embassy off the square was set alight in solidarity with the anti-apartheid struggle. This only added to the sense of chaos and danger as fire crews arrived and struggled to attend to the conflagration. In the description given by one of the protest participants, Simon Crabb, he said, "The noise and violence in the square reaches an extreme pitch. Screaming protesters, police helicopters, sirens, whistles, burning buildings, the medieval sight of horses' hooves trampling an unconscious woman, a concrete block hitting a policeman's head, a metal bar through a van's window. The sky is full of missiles, bricks, bottles, wood, anything that can come to hand, raining down onto the police, their scared and blooded faces visible through their visors." 170 feet above the demonstration, Admiral Nelson's statue stared dispassionately down as thousands of people fought with the police in front of the grand buildings of the faded British Empire, the symbols and facades of a country that seemed to be dying. Edwin Landseer's bronze lion statues nestled between the protesters, who were chanting, "We are many, they are few," and were themselves like lions rising from slumber. Batons were striking at different parts of the protest, driving people in different directions. By this point, Tony Benn was demanding to speak to senior commanders. He went up to a line of police holding their ground, viewing them with suspicion, noting later in his diary that they might have in fact been soldiers in police uniform. The police chief blamed the violence on the protesters, but Benn did not believe him. "I think what happened they had done was to break the march up, squeeze the people in the middle and frighten them, and then no doubt some bottles and things were thrown. It reminded me a bit of Wapping." Jeremy Corbyn had been due to speak, but the events that afternoon meant the final rally had to be cut short, much to the frustration of the demonstration organisers. As the police struggled for control, protesters and tourists seemed to blur into one. Some people arrested at the end of the day had not been part of the protest at the beginning. They just saw the fighting and joined in, having their own grievances with the cops. Towards the evening, looting started around Charing Cross, as music shops had their shutters torn off and guitars and keyboards were taken. One story illustrates how the events in the square were in no way reducible to the acts of isolated anarchists or violent opportunists. Zoe Young was a student at Sussex in 1990. She went up to London with her friend for the big demo. She said, "Amid all the mayhem, one moment really struck me. Somewhere near Trafalgar Square, riot going on all around us. An elderly lady was crying alone in the road. My boyfriend and I felt worried about her and asked if she needed any help. She said, 'Don't you worry, lass. I'm just so happy to see all those young and strong folk fighting to protect those of us that can't.'" So yeah, there's obviously more of the story. There's more to read about, the fallout from the protest. It's worth bearing in mind, of course, that the poll tax wasn't stopped primarily by the riot, although that did send shockwaves through the British establishment. It was the actions of millions of people across the country in refusing to pay, defying the bailiffs and the sheriffs, defying the judges, many people going to prison for non-payment of the tax. They just really brought the whole system down. Like, it was literally a policy that they couldn't implement because 17 million people just refused to pay it. So I think it's a really inspirational story. I think in times like this, when it can seem that the left's on the back foot, or things aren't moving in the right direction, I think it's important to have these kind of inspirational stories. Remember how people rose up in the past and how they fought back, and maybe learn some lessons for how we might be able to fight back again. So I hope your quarantine life is okay. Hopefully it won't last much longer. But if you do want any reading in the meantime, then Can't Pay, Won't Pay, The Fight to Stop the Poll Tax is available now from Pluto and all good online bookshops. So take care. Bye.